Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to our All Hallows Eve service. What will you dress up as on Halloween?
Yourself.
Yourself? That would be a heaven answer.
What'd she say?
Myself.
Oh.
No concealing.
Good.
We live in two worlds at the same time. Two. One we see and can measure, one we can hear, taste, see, smell, and one that is going on all the time simultaneously, that is invisible, but has its substance more real than what we can measure. Emanuel Swedenborg suggests, it's for me to invite you to think about this, that we have two angels and two demons with us at all times for the purpose of balance, of equilibrium, for the purpose of freedom, that we would have input from the invisible realm, from the spiritual world, constantly. I remember one of my professors, Reverend Dr. George Dole, asked us one day in class, how much of you is you? What could you say is your own, really? Because the lesson that day was that every thought and every feeling you have has its attendant invisible company, if you will. That doesn't mean that every thought that flies through you or every feeling that flies through you is something you want to hold on to, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the faith journey really has to do with making a decision on what you keep. Do you keep that feeling of envy and jealousy too long? It's okay if you have it. No judgment there, because you have both angels and demons on both sides. But where you become responsible is what you claim and choose and what you hold on to, if you will, your decisions. So Swedenborg says that we have these two angels and these two demons. He describes heaven, if you could imagine it, as in the shape of a human body. Christ is the head, and all the different levels of Christ in us is expressed in the usefulness of heaven's body, if you will. So that which is angelic is really describing two things: love of God first, and love of the neighbor, love of others. He also describes hell, and I invite you to consider that hell is the opposite of heaven, and that Swedenborg says that he envisioned hell as a body that sat on its head, upside down, and so that its feet were in the air, and everything was backwards and reversed. So the two ruling loves are love of self alone and love of the world or material things second. And all that you would include in that would fit into those two loves, just as the love of God and neighbor. So we have these two influences with us all the time. We can't scapegoat them. We can't say that our life is bad because the devil made me do it. Although sometimes we like to do that. It kind of relieves our guilty conscience. But that's not how it works. Because if we focus on that, we will never find joy. Joy is an after effect of owning the choice for heaven. And so, as All Hallows Eve is here, and we think about all the things that we could be frightened by. Really, whether you have recurring bad dreams, do you ever have the same nightmare? I do. I know my brother Rhett does. We have the same demon that keeps coming back. It doesn't frighten me anymore. It used to. And she still visits when I'm weak. It's a female demon. And she comes to me and she scares me. And the only thing that makes her flee very quickly, the only thing, is when I say the Lord's Prayer all the way through. If I falter and I start to weaken in the middle of the prayer, she comes back twice as strong. And through the years, through the decades of this female demon that visits me, the message rings again and again. The only point of why God allows this to happen is it is a constant reminder of the power of the Lord's love. And if I ever forget that, she comes back. And so it's an interesting thing. I don't get the Lord directly often. I don't get his presence, his face. He sends her because it keeps me in balance. It reminds me of what we all feel and fear in our life. So you don't have to have a dream of a female succubus. That's actually what a female demon is called. You don't have to have something that dramatic for evil and demons to affect you. What would you say in your life would be an effect of your demons?
Depression and anxiety.
Yes, very often. Yeah, I meet a lot of us, a lot of people who suffer with that.
Ditto, Eileen. And
Yeah.
fear and anxiety.
Fear and negativity.
Yeah. Alan mentioned one this morning. He's reading the Ten Commandments book from Swedenborg, and it's envy and jealousy. That can be one.
Anger.
Anger. Yep. Hate.
Fear.
What?
Regrets.
Regret. Yeah. Well, more guilt. I think guilt, an unhealthy guilt. Regret is healthy, I think. But I know what you're saying.
Shame.
Shame. You know why shame is so demonic?
It's like cellular.
Takes away your life. Good. Good.
Shame is a big one for demons because it's really about not feeling worthy or good enough to even occupy space on the planet.
Exactly.
Right? Yep, fear, big time.
Yeah, I have that a lot.
You ever feel incredibly discouraged? You ever feel like with all that you have inside you, and I know every one of you quite well, and you have a lot of resources of heaven in you, but you ever, even though you have a lot of good in you, do you ever feel like on some days like you just can't do it? You just don't have it.
Hopeless.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hopelessness for our dreams that we've had, that we still
Hopelessness.
carry. I think everybody has their dreams, but the hopelessness that, you know, they may not happen.
Yeah. Sometimes when I think about what we're doing to the planet and our animals, I feel hopeless. And I feel like, oh my God, there's so many people. There's so many whales. Like last night, that beautiful whale song, it was really sad. That whale song. And then it got me feeling like, oh boy, what are we doing to our fish and our wildlife and our oceans? And I have to force myself, I have to compel myself in the best sense and say, Lord, take this fear. Just take it. So all these things, whether you see it or feel it or not, is the demonic side. And that is there. God is holding that in place for us. It doesn't feel like a gift, does it? No. Thanks a lot. But it's a gift. Because if we don't know the opposite of love, we don't appreciate, we don't have the choice to make, which then brings an eternal connection that must be brought about by freedom. We must have that. It's a gift that God holds this balance. And what evil and demons do not like is gratitude. They do not like you to thank them. Because when you say, thank you, Lord, for this lesson, it opens us to all kinds of help. And it cannot be tolerated by the darkness. And now we have the other side, the angels. And I'm not saying that this is the dark side and this is the light side. We have the angels. They are bearers of light, of hope, of joy. And we have that. And that's on our other side, if you will, of our mind and spirit. And they bring all kinds of help, sometimes help unbidden. And sometimes we're not even aware that heaven is helping us. And it is. I think I've shared with you before, but it's never too much, that I was in seminary with my brother Kit, and his fiancée had recently decided to leave him for his dear friend. And he was so distraught that he was crying all night, and we had exams the next day in seminary. This is grad school level exams. And he was crying and crying on his bed, and we were going through seminary together. And I just felt so bad for him. And he was weeping, and he couldn't sleep, and his body was aching because he had been crying so many hours because he really loved her. And I didn't know what to do, and I had a paper to write that night. And I remember him crying, and he was behind me, and I was typing away like a crazy person, typing this paper. And all of a sudden, the angels with me said, "What are you doing? Your brother's in pain, and you're over here typing your paper." So I stopped typing, and I turned around, and I said a prayer. And this is the only time in my life where I have seen something of heaven awake. Usually God gives me very instructive dreams, and I hope that we all get different levels of dreaming and instruction. But this was the only time when I was flat awake. I said a prayer, and I snapped into a vision of all these angels, like crammed packed around his bed. And they were on their knees, and their hands were like this, and they were concentrating on Kit. And he fell asleep. And it wasn't, they were there whether I knew they were aware or not. I'll tell you that much. And they're just as much with you. By the way, we don't see them, but they're keeping us above water sometimes. Sometimes when we feel so discouraged, and we feel weak, and we feel afraid, and we feel like we don't have enough, we feel a sense of lack, or we can't quite say thank you like we normally can. You ever have those days where it's harder to say thank you? Now, there's just so many different human states we go through. So many times where we feel angry, and we don't realize that we are not alone. And that these beings of life are all around us, and they're helping us. And every once in a while, we get a glimpse of the reality of their presence. So Reverend Dr. Bob Curvin wrote a book on angels, and each chapter was on what angels do. One of the things that he reminds us from Swedenborg is that angels not only help us come into the world, so little newborns and babies are particularly surrounded by angels, particularly. And especially when you go to the NICU at the hospital, or you know a friend or family member who has a sick child. That child, little Irma's little Jack, her great-grandson Jack, angelic help. And angels also help us leave this world. They have very particular love of helping us transition into the next life. There are angels of memory. There are angels of healing. There are angels that help us find our car keys, Karen. Yeah. There are angels that help us grieve. There's angels that help us garden. You ever feel the presence of gardening angels? I know I do. There's angels that help us find joy. There are angels that help us when we fall in love. There are angels, and they're called conjugal angels, by the way. That's the Latin term for marriage love. And there's angels for us when we lose love or when we want love. There's angels that are very, very close to the Lord. And when we feel particularly close to the Lord has those angels with us. Ultimately, Swedenborg says, the Lord fills every angel. And the good news of this particular faith tradition is that you will become angels by choice. And so, you see in the Word, and these are just a few examples, you see when Mary, she was given the Annunciation that she was to have a child, and his name would be Jesus. An angel told her that. The angels visited the shepherds, keeping watch by their flocks at night. The angels were there when the women were at the tomb of Jesus' body. He's not here. He's risen. Angel wrestled with Jacob. And a deeper truth in the Hebrew tradition is that Jacob was wrestling himself. You ever feel like you're wrestling yourself? Mm-hmm. Sometimes we blame somebody else like we're wrestling somebody else and they made me unhappy. But the deeper Hebrew tradition tells us there's no angel out there fighting us. We're just fighting our own shadow. The 7 angels in Revelation who surround us in the sanctuary, thanks to Reverend Jen's church and her gift. The angels that teach us about warning and caution. But the closing note of this entire message is something that you could have picked up when Reverend Theron was reading. All of this tells us that there's nothing to fear. That God is sovereign. That everything that is allowed has a purpose for good for those who love God. So there really is nothing to fear. God is sovereign. The power of God, of love itself, cannot even be touched. In fact, it makes the demons flee. There's no strength. It's like if somebody were to just drop from a standing position and just become jelly on the floor. That's the reaction of the demon to love. So put your faith, put your trust in the power of love. The power of God is incredible. And we don't realize the resource that's always with us. It's so amazing. And I say this to the people I visit every day. Put your trust in the Lord, for He is your help.